Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you've been around here for a while, you know that I make a lot of content on singleness and on waiting that really just came from my own wait in singleness and longing for marriage. I even wrote an entire devotional speaking encouragement into this season and this longing. It's my Still Single devotional. I'll have it linked down below if you want to check it out. But oftentimes on these videos I've made about waiting or about singleness, I'll see comments that say something to the effect of, I've been in this situation, whether it's singleness or some other area of waiting. I've been in this situation for so long. I've been waiting and praying, but nothing has changed, and it's been years. And when I see those comments, man, I feel that because I've been there before and I felt that exact same way before. And so today I want to share something that was incredibly encouraging to me when I was feeling that exact same way. I was feeling just so discouraged and feeling like so many things in my life had looked the same for so long, and I wasn't seeing any sort of visible change in the things that I was praying for. And so in this space, I was actually praying and asking God to encourage me and to help me see and believe that He was doing more than I could see, because I knew this was true, right? I knew this was true of His character, but it didn't feel like it. And so I was praying sort of almost that prayer we see in Mark 9:24 of, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. And so in this space of asking God to encourage me in the discouragement I was feeling, I came across this verse that profoundly encouraged me. And so I want to share that verse with you today. We're going to get right into it. But before we do, if you haven't already, please be sure to like and subscribe, all the things. I make Christian faith and lifestyle content, and I would love to have you here. But now let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to read you the passage that this verse I came across comes from, and it's found in Deuteronomy chapter 8 if you want to read along. I'll also have it up on the screen, but we're going to read verses 1 through 10. It says, "The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that He might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in His ways and by fearing Him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land He has given you." Okay, so a little bit of context. This passage is God speaking to the Israelites. The Israelites are His people, and they have been wandering throughout their wilderness journey, and they are being prepared to enter into the promised land. This is the good land that God had promised to them. And so the thing that really stood out to me about this passage when I was reading through it, when I was praying, asking God to encourage me, the thing that really stood out to me was the manna. So manna is this bread from heaven that God was feeding the Israelites with while they were in the wilderness, because they're in the desert. They can't just run to the grocery store and get food, but God was providing for them literally by dropping bread from heaven, and every day He would give them just enough for that day. And so they would have to go out and gather the bread from the ground and eat it, and then before the Sabbath He would drop a double portion so that they could gather enough for the Sabbath and not have to go out and do that on the Sabbath day. And so manna most commentaries believe that it was this substance that was ground into sort of these cakes, and that it would have had maybe like a similar taste to wafers with honey. For 40 years, God was feeding the Israelites manna, which was this bread from heaven. And the text here that we just read said that this was not familiar to them, and it wasn't familiar to their fathers. And so think about eating food that maybe is familiar to you. I don't know what you grew up eating, what was a staple in your home. Comment it down below. We had a lot of pasta because my dad is Italian, but think about food that is familiar to you, and then maybe going into a different culture where they eat something that is totally unfamiliar to you. That's what this was to the Israelites. They were not familiar with the manna, and not only that, but it wasn't what they wanted to be eating. It was monotonous, and it was something that they were eating every single day for 40 years. And as I was reading through this passage, it was almost like it gave me this sense of validation that even if we look just at the food the Israelites were eating, that yes, it was the same. It was the same thing day after day, and it was monotonous. And not only was it the same thing day after day, but it wasn't like it was this grand, delicious meal that they were eating constantly, but it was probably pretty plain and probably pretty boring, and they were eating it day after day. So this was their food every day without change for 40 years, yet we see here that there was purpose in the manna. Verse 3 says that it was so that they might know that man does not live on bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And so the purpose in this manna that God was feeding them day after day was that they might learn to hunger after the word of God. And in the wilderness more generally, if we look at the purpose of that there, it talks about that earlier in the passage, that the purpose of the wilderness was so that they would learn to walk in God's ways and keep his commandments. And so there was a purpose in the manna, there was a purpose in the wilderness, yet it was still this feeling they were feeling of it being the same thing day after day without change for 40 whole years. And I know I keep repeating that, I know I keep driving it home and that it sounds repetitive, but I really just want to drive that home because I think that so oftentimes when we're in our waiting season, we can, listen to a video like this or be encouraged by something in God's word, and then it kind of fades quickly and we're like, well, but it hasn't changed. Like, yeah, I was maybe encouraged at this point and at this point, but here I am still in the same spot. Still nothing has changed. And the Israelites got it. That's the situation they were in. 40 years, no change, day after day after day. But what encouraged me about this verse and this passage when I read it is that what they could see in the wilderness, what they had experienced in the wilderness, was not all there was. Because in verse 7, we see that there is a good land coming, and it is going to be a land filled with brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates and olive trees and honey, a land where they will eat bread without scarcity. And there's this picture here of this land that is coming that is filled with variety, that is filled with vibrance, and that is filled with abundance. Yes, they had experienced the same thing day after day after day for many years, but there was more than they could see. There was a good land that was coming, and yet there was purpose in the monotony of the manna that they had been being fed day after day to prepare them for that good land that was coming. And I remember as I was reading through this passage, it was encouraging to me because it was almost validating. It was almost like God saying, yes, I know there's a lot in your life that has felt the same for a long time. I know there's a lot that has felt unchanging or repetitive, and that is true. But what's also true is that that is not all there is. There's more that I'm doing. There's more that you cannot see. There's more that I have for you, but there's also purpose in exactly where I have you right now. And the other thing that really stood out to me about this passage is that the Israelites may not have been getting what they wanted in the wilderness, yet God never let them hunger. Verse 4 says, "Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years." And so they may not have wanted the manna, yet God was still feeding them. He never let them hunger. The clothing on their backs did not wear out. Their feet did not swell. He was still providing for them. He was still meeting all of their needs, and they were never without, and they were never in need. And I realized that the same thing was true in my own life, that even if I hadn't seen change in the areas I was hoping to see change, even if I hadn't seen an answer to prayer yet in the things that I had been praying for years and years, that even despite those things, that God had never for a second let me be in need. He had never failed to care for me, to provide for me, even if it didn't look exactly like what I hoped it would look like in that season. And even just sharing this now, it's an encouragement and a reminder to me now to not miss the things that God is currently doing, because I'm so focused on what I hope for Him to still do, and to not forget the answered prayers that I'm already currently living in. Because the reality is that even when we haven't seen the change yet of the things that we're hoping to see, God is still moving. He is still working. He is still providing for us and caring for us. And at the same time, what we can see right now is not all there is, because God is always moving and always working, and His plan for us is constantly unfolding. And so when I read through this passage, it was such an encouragement to me and a reminder to me of the goodness of God to provide for us and to care for us, even in those in-between seasons, even in those times of waiting, even when we are without the thing that we are praying for or without the change that we are longing to see. And so I just wanted to encourage that and speak that into any of you who might feel like you are in this season where you're just praying and waiting and you're not seeing any change, to remember that what you can see right now is not all there is, but to also acknowledge and remember to thank God for the ways that He is currently providing for you and caring for you. And so I encourage you to read through that entire story in Deuteronomy chapter 8, and really just the entire story of the Israelites and their wilderness journey, if you want to dig into this more and be more encouraged, because there's so much to glean from their story, so many reminders of who God is and how He is faithful even in the wait, even when we can't see Him moving. And I would love to hear from you down below if you want to leave a comment, just sharing one way that you see God really caring for you in your current season, even if there are still things that you're praying for. And so I'm excited to read through those comments. I hope this video was helpful to you or encouraging. If it was, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you in my next one. Bye.